She tried human breeding, and now she's addicted to me. Dr. Zelari von believed in results, data, and clean conclusions. Curiosity was an emotional flaw her species had mostly removed from themselves thousands of cycles ago. It caused distraction, inefficiency, and attachment. None of those things belonged in proper science. That was why she was trusted with humanity. Humans were new to the galactic stage. Loud, emotional, creative, messy. The galactic conquered found them fascinating in the way one might find a storm fascinating from a distance. Humans advanced too fast, argued too much, and bonded too deeply. Their biology was average, their technology was uneven, their behavior was impossible to predict. The conquered wanted to know why. Zelari's task was simple on paper: observe human development under controlled conditions. Identify traits worth encouraging. Study whether guided reproduction, culture shaping, or behavioral correction could make humans more efficient members of galactic society. The program was labeled politely as human potential research. Privately, many called it breeding. Zelari did not care what it was called. Names did not change outcomes. She selected her subject carefully. Not a leader, not a soldier, not a scientist, not anyone famous or powerful. She wanted a baseline human, someone ordinary enough that any change could be clearly measured. That was how Elias Ward was chosen. Elias was 32 by Earth counting. He had no genetic modifications, no criminal history, no exceptional talents listed in his records. He worked in infrastructure maintenance on an orbital station before volunteering for off-world research exchange. His medical scans were boring. His psychological profile was stable, though marked with something the translators labeled as persistent curiosity. Zelari almost rejected him for that reason alone, but the committee wanted variety. They approved him. The first meeting was meant to be procedural. Elias entered the observation chamber wearing simple station clothes. He looked around with open interest, not fear. When he saw Zelari behind the transparent barrier, he smiled. That was unexpected. "Hello," he said, raising a hand in a casual human greeting. "So, you're the scientist?" Zelari blinked once. Her species did not smile, but her throat muscles tightened slightly, an unconscious response she did not notice. "Yes," she said through the translator. "You may sit." Elias sat, but not rigidly. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Can I ask a question before we start?" "You may ask questions when prompted," Zelari replied. He nodded. "Okay, then what are you hoping to learn from me?" Zelari paused. That pause lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Elias to notice. "That information is not necessary for compliance," she said. "Oh," Elias said, "I wasn't worried about compliance, I was just curious." There it was again, curiosity, unprompted, unnecessary. Zelari began the tests. They were simple at first. Logic problems, pattern recognition, social response simulations, emotional regulation tasks. Elias performed within expected human ranges, sometimes slightly above, sometimes slightly below, nothing special. But he kept asking questions, not just about the tests, but about her. "How long did your people study your own biology before changing it?" Over several cycles, something odd appeared in the data. Elias improved, not in raw ability, but in adaptation speed. When a task changed rules without warning, he adjusted faster than predicted. When emotional simulations became more complex, he responded with nuance rather than confusion. He remembered patterns not because they were logical, but because they were meaningful to him. Meaning was not a measurable unit. Zelari adjusted parameters. She increased cognitive pressure. She reduced rest periods. She altered environmental conditions. Elias complained mildly but continued. Then, during a memory recall test, he surprised her. "This one doesn't make sense," Elias said, pointing at a scenario. "You're asking what the most efficient answer is, but humans wouldn't pick that." "The most efficient answer is the correct one," Zelari said. "Not for us," he replied. "We don't always choose what's best. We choose what feels right or what protects someone else. Or what tells a better story. That is inefficient." "Yeah," Elias said with a small smile, "but it's kind of our thing." Zelari dismissed the comment. Yet later, while reviewing the session alone, she replayed it several times. She noticed something troubling. Her neural engagement levels had increased during the conversation. Not during data review, not during test calibration, during the human's explanation. That was unusual. She extended Elias' observation period under the justification of long-term behavioral drift analysis. The Conquered approved without question. They trusted her conclusions. More time meant more exposure. Elias began to notice patterns, too. "You watch me when you think I'm not paying attention," he said one cycle. Zelari froze. "You are mistaken," he shrugged. "Maybe, but if I'm wrong, then you won't mind me asking this." He looked directly at the barrier separating them. "Do you think I'm broken?" Zelari opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. "No," she said slowly. "You are functioning within normal human parameters." "That's not what I asked," Elias said gently. Zelari ended the session early. That night, she accessed human cultural archives for the first time without a research directive. She read stories, not historical records or data summaries, but fiction. Human-made stories full of impossible choices, emotional sacrifice, and illogical hope. Her neural activity spiked again. Over time, Elias became less like a subject and more like a constant. He remembered her preferences, adjusted his speech patterns to make translation easier. He once waited through an entire delayed session without complaint, simply because he thought she might be busy. No subject had ever considered her state before. Zelari noticed changes in herself. She delayed sending reports. She softened language. She removed certain recommendations about genetic correction, replacing them with notes about cultural resilience. The Conquered sent a message. Progress was slower than expected. Zelari replied that humans required more observation. That premature interference could damage valuable traits. This was true, but not in the way she meant it. During one late session, Elias asked a question she could not ignore. "If you could redesign your species today," he said, "would you keep everything the same?" Zelari hesitated. "I do not know," she admitted. Elias smiled, not triumphantly but kindly. "That's okay. Not knowing is how change starts for us." After the session ended, Zelari remained alone in the chamber. She stared at the empty seat where the human had been. For the first time in her long career, she did not feel satisfaction from collected data. She felt anticipation. And somewhere deep in her carefully balanced mind, a quiet realization formed, one that made her processors tremble. The experiment was no longer observing the human. The human was altering the observer, and she did not want it to stop. Zelari Von told herself she was still in control. She repeated this thought often, usually while reviewing data that no longer felt complete no matter how carefully it was measured. The human, Elias Ward, had become an irregular variable, not because of anything he did wrong, but because of what he inspired. That was not supposed to happen. The Galactic Conquered contacted her again. Their message was polite, structured, and cold. They asked for progress reports, projections, and recommendations. They wanted numbers. They wanted outcomes. They wanted to know when optimization would begin. Zelari delayed her response longer than protocol allowed. When she finally answered, her message was technically correct, but emotionally misleading. She wrote that humans showed resistance to forced direction and that deeper understanding was required before any structural change could be applied. What she did not say was that she had already decided something. She would not optimize Elias. She increased interaction time instead. Elias noticed the change quickly. "You're talking more," he said during one session. "Not just asking questions, actually talking." "This improves data accuracy," Zelari replied. "Sure," Elias said, "if that helps you sleep better." "I do not sleep," she said. "That explains a lot," he replied with a grin. Moments like that were becoming common. Small exchanges with no scientific value, yet they stayed with her longer than any chart or analysis. Zelari began to understand that humans did not communicate only to exchange information. They communicated to connect. That realization changed everything. One cycle, Zelari introduced a complex problem-solving simulation. It was designed to test long-term planning under uncertainty. There was no single correct answer, only outcomes that favored different values. Elias studied the simulation quietly. "You can win this," Zelari said. "If you sacrifice the smaller group, overall survival increases." Elias nodded slowly. "I know." He did not choose that option. Instead, he chose a path that reduced overall success but preserved the smaller group. The simulation marked the result as suboptimal. "Why?" Zelari asked. Elias shrugged. "Because if I was in that smaller group, I'd hope someone would make the same choice." "That logic is flawed," Zelari said. "It assumes emotional projection." Yeah, he said softly, that's kind of our thing. Zelari marked the result. Later, alone, she replayed the decision, not the outcome but the hesitation before it. The moment where Elias had understood the cost and accepted it anyway. Her species would never make that choice. That night, she accessed restricted conquered archives. Records of previous civilizations that had been guided toward efficiency. Many had improved quickly, most had lost cultural depth. Some had collapsed when faced with unexpected change. Humans, she realized, thrived in unexpected change. The next message from the conquered was less patient. They requested preliminary genetic recommendations. They wanted to begin trials. Zelari stared at the request for a long time. Then she invited Elias for an unscheduled session. You are aware that this program may change your species, she said carefully. Elias nodded. Yeah, I figured. And you volunteered anyway. I wanted to see the stars, he said, and maybe show them who we are. You are only one human, Zelari said. He smiled. That's usually enough to get things started. She studied him not as a subject, but as an example. Elias was not exceptional. He was kind, curious, thoughtful, flawed, human. Zelari made her decision. She sent her final report to the conquered. In it, she stated that human development could not be safely guided through selective breeding, genetic control, or behavioral correction. She wrote that humanity's strength was not biological efficiency, but adaptive meaning-making. Attempts to optimize them would reduce their greatest advantage. She concluded with a recommendation: leave them alone. The conquered responded with silence, then with confusion, then with resistance. They questioned her data, her methods, her conclusions. They suggested a replacement scientist. Zelari did not argue. Instead, she requested program termination authority. It took time, debate, review. During that time, Elias was informed that his participation would soon end. You did good, he told her. Whatever happens next. You believe this was successful? She asked. Yes, he said. You listened. That word stayed with her. When the final approval came, Zelari felt something unfamiliar: relief. Elias was cleared to return to human space. On the last day, he stood in the chamber where they had spoken so many times. So, he said, what happens to you now? Zelari paused. I will continue research. On humans? On myself, she said honestly. Elias laughed softly. Yeah, that tracks. Before he left, he turned back. For what it's worth, I don't think you were trying to control us. I think you just didn't know another way. That may be true, she replied. After he was gone, the chamber felt empty in a way no room ever had before. Zelari submitted one final private note to her personal archive. It was not scientific. It was a confession. Humans could not be bred into greatness. They grew into it through connection, contradiction, and care. They changed not by design, but by choice. Weeks later, the conquered officially classified humanity as non-interference recommended. Zelari read the notice alone. She did not feel victory. She felt gratitude. Because somewhere in the vast, cold structure of the galaxy, a species remained free to be inefficient, emotional, unpredictable, and strong in ways no model could measure. And she, once a perfect observer, had been changed by them. Not through force, not through design, but through something far more powerful. Meaning, time passed differently after Elias left. Zelari Von noticed it first in the silence. Her days were still full of work, meetings, and reports, but something had changed. The work no longer felt like the center of her existence. It felt like a tool, not a purpose. She continued her research, but now it was inward. Her species had never encouraged self-reflection. They believed the self was already complete. To question it was to introduce instability. Yet Zelari found that instability was not weakness. It was movement. She replayed past interactions with Elias not to analyze his behavior, but to understand her own reactions. Why certain words stayed with her. Why certain moments mattered. She began to write personal notes, not data logs, thoughts. That alone would have shocked her former self. The galactic conquered kept its distance for a while. Humanity was labeled as protected through non-interference, but protection did not mean respect. Many within the conquered still believed humans were a problem waiting to grow. Zelari was aware of this. When a new committee formed to reassess emerging species policies, her name appeared on the candidate list. She was asked to present her findings in person. She accepted. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from dozens of species. They watched her with interest and caution. She was known now not just as a scientist, but as the one who stopped a program meant to reshape an entire species. Zelari stood alone in the center. "Explain," one representative said, "why humans should be treated differently." Zelari did not begin with numbers. She spoke of adaptability, of how humans responded to uncertainty not by freezing, but by creating meaning. She explained that humans did not evolve toward perfection, but toward connection. "They do not survive because they are the strongest," she said. "They survive because they change together." Some dismissed her words as emotional influence. Others listened. Then she did something unexpected. She shared a personal account. She described how observing a single human had changed her understanding of intelligence, success, and purpose. She admitted that the experiment had altered her, and that this change had made her a better scientist, not a worse one. Silence followed. Finally, a question came. "If humans are so influential," a voice asked, "are they dangerous?" Zelari answered honestly, "Only if we try to control them." The committee did not decide that day, but something shifted. Later, alone, Zelari received a private message. It was from human space, from Elias. The message was simple. He was back on Earth. Life was loud, confusing, and familiar. He had taken a job teaching basic systems engineering. He liked it. He asked if she was well. Zelari read the message several times. She replied. Their communication became irregular but steady. They did not speak often, but when they did, it mattered. Elias told her about small things, weather, students, music, questions his people still argued about. Zelari told him about the galaxy, about debates that moved slowly, about ideas that took centuries to change. "Sounds exhausting," Elias wrote once. "It is," she replied, "but it is changing." Years passed. Humanity grew. They did not grow into a single shape. They spread into many. Artists, explorers, engineers, diplomats. They argued loudly, failed often, and adapted constantly. The conquered watched carefully. Humans did not dominate. They connected. They formed alliances not through fear, but through shared goals. They helped smaller species solve problems without demanding control. They brought stories, humor, and strange celebrations into sterile halls. Some found them annoying. Many found them impossible to ignore. Zelari observed it all. One day, a new proposal reached her desk, a request for a human cultural exchange advisor. Someone who understood both perspectives. Zelari recommended a name, Elias Ward. When he arrived at the station months later, he looked older but familiar. He smiled when he saw her just as he had the first day. "Still watching people through glass?" he asked. "Less glass now," she replied. They worked together, not as scientist and subject, as colleagues. Elias helped translate human behavior into something the conquered could understand, not by simplifying it, but by explaining why complexity mattered. Zelari supported him, explaining alien logic to humans who struggled with its coldness. Together, they built bridges that data alone never could. One evening, after a long session, Elias said, "You know, back then I thought I was being studied." "You were," Zelari said. "Yeah," he replied, "but I think you were too." Zelari did not deny it. She had learned something important. Humanity's greatest strength was not their minds, their bodies, or their technology. It was their ability to change others without trying to. They did not conquer hearts. They invited them, and once invited, nothing stayed the same. Zelari looked out at the stars, no longer as subjects to be categorized, but as stories still being written. For the first time, she did not need an answer. She was content to keep learning. Change rarely announced itself in the galaxy. It arrived quietly in small choices, small conversations, and small moments that did not seem important at the time. Zelari Von noticed these changes long before most others did, not because she was wiser, but because she had learned how to watch differently. The station felt different now. It was louder, not with noise, but with presence. Species that once passed each other without acknowledgement now paused to speak. Humans were often at the center of these moments, not because they demanded attention, but because they invited it. Elias Ward had become very good at that. As a cultural exchange advisor, he spent his days explaining things that could not be measured. Why humans argued even when they agreed. Why they laughed during serious meetings. Why they valued stories as much as solutions. At first, many delegates found him confusing. Later, they found him useful. Zelari watched him work with quiet pride. She noticed how he listened more than he spoke, how he changed his explanations based on who was listening, how he never claimed humans were better, only different. That honesty mattered. Some within the conquered were uneasy. Humanity was spreading influence without authority. They were shaping thought, not law. That kind of influence was harder to control. A proposal emerged. It was framed carefully, using neutral language. The conquered suggested creating a unified cultural framework, one that would reduce misunderstanding across species. Humans would be included but guided. Their influence would be shaped, contained, and standardized. Zelari understood what it really was. Control without saying the word. She requested access to the full proposal and spent many cycles reviewing it. The language was polite, the intentions appeared logical, but the result would be the same as before. Humanity would be softened into something easier to manage. She spoke to Elias. "They want to help us fit in," he said after reading it, "which usually means changing us." "Yes," Zelari replied, "they believe it will reduce conflict." Elias leaned back, thoughtful. "It might for a while." "But," Zelari asked. "But you'd lose what makes humans human," he said. "And honestly, what makes the galaxy interesting?" Zelari nodded. She had a choice to make again. This time she was not alone. She gathered allies, not rebels, not radicals, but observers. Scientists, diplomats, analysts from many species who had worked with humans and seen the effects firsthand. She did not ask them to oppose the proposal. She asked them to share their experiences. When the council met, the chamber was full. Zelari spoke, but she did not lead alone. Others followed. A small species that had nearly lost its culture under optimization policies. A trader who had learned trust from humans after centuries of suspicion. A diplomat who had discovered that emotional honesty prevented more conflicts than rigid rules ever had. The proposal slowed. Questions were raised, doubts formed. It did not fail immediately, but it weakened. Outside the council, something else happened. Humans continued being human. They formed joint research teams that mixed logic with creativity. They helped design stations that considered comfort as well as efficiency. They shared music, food, and strange celebrations that made no sense but brought people together anyway. Zelari realized something important. Humanity was not changing the galaxy by force or planning. They were changing it by being present. One quiet cycle, Elias asked Zelari a question he had never asked before. "Do you regret it?" he said, "stopping the program?" Choosing this path, Zelari considered carefully. "No," she said, "I regret not questioning sooner." Elias smiled. "That's growth." "Yes," she agreed, "it is." Years passed again. The conquered never officially admitted a mistake. They never said the word wrong. But policies changed. Language softened. Interference became guidance. Guidance became cooperation. Humanity earned a new classification, not protected, partnered. Zelari received the notice while standing near a wide viewport, watching ships arrive from many systems. Among them were human vessels, each one different, each one carrying people who would argue, adapt, fail, and try again. She felt something close to peace. Elias stood beside her. "You know," he said, "back when we first met, I thought you were scary." "That is understandable," Zelari replied. "I didn't think you'd become one of the reasons humans belong out here." Zelari looked at him. "Humans always belonged." "Maybe," he said. "But you helped others see it." They stood in silence for a while. The galaxy was still imperfect. There were still disagreements, slow systems, and old fears, but something had shifted beneath it all. A new understanding. That intelligence was not just efficiency. That strength was not just control. That progress did not always move in straight lines. Zelari Vaughn, once a perfect observer, had become something else entirely. A participant, and she would not trade that for any amount of certainty. As the stars stretched endlessly before her, she felt no need to measure them. Some things she had learned were meant to be experienced.